The night sky above New Terra Colony shimmered with unfamiliar constellations, casting an eerie blue glow across the settlement's perimeter fence. David Shin stood at his post, rifle slung across his shoulder, watching the darkness beyond the colony's lights with practiced vigilance. 6 months stationed at this frontier outpost had taught him that the darkness of an alien world held secrets Earth scientists had barely begun to understand. "Movement in Sector 4, crackled his comm unit. "Probably just local wildlife, but check it out." David sighed, adjusting his night vision goggles as he turned toward the eastern fence line. Most nights, these alerts amounted to nothing more than curious six-legged herbivores drawn to the colony's hydroponic gardens. Still, protocol demanded investigation of every potential breach. As he approached the fence, his goggles picked up a heat signature unlike the usual wildlife. This one was bipedal, smaller than an adult human, moving with purpose rather than the random wanderings of animals. David's pulse quickened. The indigenous sentient species, the Vori, rarely approached human settlements after the hostilities 3 years ago. "Command, I've got a single intruder, Sector 4 East. Appears to be juvenile Valori. Requesting instructions." The response was immediate and cold. "Detain if possible. Eliminate if threatened. The treaty's clear, they know the boundaries." David frowned. The military leadership remained hardened by the brief but bloody conflict when humans first established the colony. But something seemed off about this encounter. The figure moved erratically, almost desperately, nothing like the disciplined Val-Ori warriors he'd trained to defend against. When he was 20 meters from the fence, he saw her clearly. A Val-Ori child, no more than the equivalent of a human 10-year-old, her iridescent skin dull with exhaustion and what appeared to be dried blood. One of her 4 upper limbs hung uselessly at her side. She collapsed against the fence, her large almond-shaped eyes reflecting his flashlight beam. "Stand down, Command," David whispered into his comm. "It's an injured child. I'm bringing her in." "Negative, soldier." The treaty. David switched off his comm's 6 months of following orders, of watching the uneasy peace between humans and Val-Ori deteriorate into cold hostility. 6 months of rumors about Val-Ori villages being raided by unknown forces. 6 months was enough. The child flinched as he approached, a soft trilling sound escaping her throat, the Val-Ori equivalent of whimpering. David holstered his weapon and knelt, palms open in the universal gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said softly, knowing she wouldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might convey his intent. "I won't hurt you." The colony's xenobiologists had made some progress with Val-Ori language, but David knew only a few basic phrases. He attempted the Val-Ori greeting, a series of clicks and whistles that roughly translated to "peace between us." Her eyes widened, multifaceted pupils dilating in surprise. She responded with a weak series of trills, one 3-fingered hand reaching toward him hesitantly. When David gently took her hand, he noticed the intricate markings on her forearm, clan markings, according to briefings. This child belonged to the Northern Valori, a clan believed wiped out in the recent border skirmishes. If she was here alone, injured and desperate enough to approach a human settlement. "Come with me," David said, deciding in that moment that protocols and treaties be damned. He helped her to her feet, noting how she wobbled unsteadily, likely from dehydration and hunger. The Val-Ori metabolism ran faster than humans. She needed medical attention soon. Alarms blared as he carried her through the colony gate. Floodlights snapped on, bathing them in harsh white light as security personnel rushed forward, weapons trained on the alien child. "Stand down," David shouted, shielding her with his body. "She needs medical attention." Captain Reyes pushed through the gathering crowd, face darkening with fury. "You've violated direct orders, Chin. You've broken the treaty and endangered this entire colony." "Look at her, Captain," David challenged, stepping aside so Reyes could see the frightened, injured child. "She's the last of her clan. Something happened out there, something we need to understand." The colony's chief medical officer, Dr. Harper, broke through the standoff. "Move aside," she ordered, kneeling to examine the Val-Ori child. "She's severely dehydrated and has multiple fractures. I don't care about your treaties or protocols. I took an oath to preserve life. As medics carefully transferred the child to a stretcher, her eyes never left David's face. One three-fingered hand reached out, grasping his fingers with surprising strength. You're going to be okay, David promised, walking alongside the stretcher toward the medical facility. He didn't know how he would explain his actions to command. He didn't know what diplomatic incident might unfold from this rescue. He didn't know if saving one Val-Ori child might somehow bridge the growing divide between their species. What he did know with absolute certainty was that in her eyes he saw something universal: fear, hope, and the desperate need to survive. Human or alien, some connections transcended the barriers of biology and language. As the medical bay doors slid open, David realized he had changed the course of not just her future, but perhaps the future of human-Valori relations on New Terra. The question now was whether the colony, and Earth Command, would see this moment as he did, not as a treaty violation, but as their shared humanity's finest hour. The medical bay hummed with activity as Dr. Harper worked quickly, her movements precise and confident. David stood back, watching as the doctor's team carefully cleaned the Valori child's wounds and connected monitoring equipment adjusted for her unique physiology. Thankfully, Harper had specialized in xenobiology before volunteering for frontier service, one of the few doctors in the colony with extensive knowledge of Valori anatomy. How bad is it? David asked quietly, conscious of the armed guards stationed at the door. Captain Reyes had reluctantly allowed the medical intervention but made it clear this was a temporary measure until Earth Command responded to the situation. The doctor. Harper glanced up, her expression grave. Multiple lacerations, evidence of blunt force trauma, severe dehydration. Her left auxiliary limb has 3 fractures. She lowered her voice. These aren't accident injuries, Chin. Someone did this to her. Deliberately. The implication hung heavy in the sterile air. Relations between humans and Val-Ori had been strained, but outright violence against children crossed a line neither side had publicly acknowledged breaching. Any idea how long until she can communicate? David asked. Hours, maybe a day. I've administered nutrients and pain management appropriate for her species. Dr. Harper's eyes narrowed. What exactly are you planning, soldier? Before David could respond, the medical bay doors slid open. Lieutenant Commander Walsh strode in, his face a mask of barely contained fury. As the colony's military liaison, Walsh answered directly to Earth Command, and he took the treaty limitations deadly seriously. Chen, you're officially relieved of duty pending investigation, Walsh announced, not bothering to lower his voice. The diplomatic incident you've created could jeopardize everything we've built here. David stood his ground. With respect, sir, she's a child. A refugee. She's an unauthorized alien presence in a restricted human settlement, Walsh countered. And you're forgetting the bigger picture. If the Val-Ori elders discover we're holding one of their young, they could interpret it as kidnapping. Have you forgotten what happened at the Proxima colony? Everyone in the room tensed. 3 years ago, a similar misunderstanding at humanity's first extrasolar colony had escalated into a conflict that left hundreds dead on both sides. The fragile peace established afterward had shaped the strict non-interference policies now in place throughout human Valori territories. This is different, David insisted. Look at her clan markings. Northern Val-Ori. Intelligence reported their settlements were abandoned weeks ago. No one knows what happened to them. Walsh's expression flickered briefly, something David caught but couldn't quite interpret. Concern? Guilt? Whatever it was vanished behind military discipline within seconds. That's classified information, soldier. And irrelevant to your violation of direct orders. Dr. Harper stepped between them. Gentlemen, this is still my medical bay. And regardless of species, my patient needs rest. She turned to Walsh. You can court-martial Chen later. Right now, I need to continue treatment without stress hormones flooding her system. Walsh looked like he might argue, but instead nodded curtly. 24 hours, Doctor. After that, Earth Command will determine the appropriate course of action. He fixed David with a cold stare. Report to security for processing. Your clearances are revoked effective immediately. After Walsh departed, David lingered, watching the rise and fall of the Valori child's chest. Despite her alien features, there was something profoundly vulnerable in the way she curled slightly on her side, the way all sentient young did when seeking safety in sleep. "I can give you 5 minutes," Dr. Harper said, checking the monitors. "Then you really should go before Walsh sends a security team." "Harper, something doesn't add up. The northern Valori territories are over 300 kilometers from here. How did she make it this far alone, injured like this?" The doctor sighed. "I've been wondering the same thing. Her injuries are at least 5 days old, based on Valori healing rates. No child could have traveled that distance in her condition." Harper hesitated, then added, "And there's something else. I found residue on her skin, chemical compounds consistent with human transport decontamination protocols." The implication struck David like a physical blow. "You think humans were in the Northern Territories? That's a major treaty violation." "I think there's more happening than what we're being told," Harper replied carefully. "Military patrols have increased. Supply shipments catalogued as scientific equipment arriving weekly. Walsh conducting classified briefings with select security personnel." David's mind raced. Before being stationed at the perimeter, he'd worked in communications. He'd noticed unusual encrypted transmissions to Earth Command, transmissions outside the regular reporting schedule. "I need to find out what she knows," David decided. "When she wakes up, can you—" A soft trilling sound interrupted them. The Valori child's eyes had opened, multifaceted pupils adjusting to the light. David approached slowly, palms open in the same peaceful gesture he'd used at the fence. She trilled again, a different pattern this time. Her working upper limbs moved in what appeared to be a deliberate sequence. "She's using sign language," Harper whispered. "Basic Valori kinetic communication. The xenolinguistics team documented some of it during the peace negotiations." The child repeated the sequence, more urgently now, her eyes fixed on David. "What's she saying?" he asked. Harper frowned in concentration. "I'm not certain, but I think it's— They're coming." The medical bay lights flickered suddenly, and distant alarms began to sound throughout the colony. Emergency protocols initiating throughout the settlement. David's comm unit, which he'd switched back on after entering the colony, crackled to life with the automated emergency broadcast. "Attention all personnel. Unidentified vessels approaching colony airspace. This is not a drill. Defensive positions. Repeat, this is not a drill." The Valori child reached out, grasping David's wrist with surprising strength. Through the touch, he felt a tremor running through her small body, not weakness from her injuries, but pure, undiluted fear. The colony's emergency lights bathed the medical bay in pulsing red as David made a split-second decision. Protocol dictated he report to the defense station immediately, but the fear in the Valori child's eyes told him everything he needed to know. "Harper, we need to move her. Now." The doctor was already disconnecting monitoring equipment. "The secure lab in sublevel 3. It has independent power and can be sealed from the main systems." David gently lifted the Valori child, who trilled softly but didn't resist. She weighed less than he expected, her body unnaturally light from malnutrition and trauma. Her large eyes fixed on his face with an intelligence that transcended their language barriers. "It's going to be okay," he said, knowing she couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone conveyed reassurance. "I won't let anything happen to you." They slipped out through the service corridor just as the main lights failed completely. Emergency generators kicked in seconds later, but the momentary darkness was enough to cover their movement from the guards who'd been stationed outside. "The colony defense grid should handle any unauthorized ships," Harper said as they hurried through the dimly lit passageway. "This is probably just a precaution." David shook his head. "The timing isn't coincidence. Whatever happened to her clan, whoever's responsible, they followed her here." The sublevel access required Harper's medical override. As the elevator descended, David's comm unit crackled with fragmented transmissions, multiple vessels, unknown configuration, not responding to hails, defensive perimeter breach in Sector 7 and the transmission cut out as they reached sublevel 3, concrete and metal shielding blocking communications. The secure lab was originally designed for containing potentially hazardous alien specimens, but it had been repurposed for sensitive medical research after the peace treaty restricted biological sampling. Harper sealed the door behind them, activating the lab's independent systems. Status monitors flickered to life, displaying the Chowdy. See situation above. Colony defense forces were mobilizing, but there was confusion in their movements, as if command structure had broken down. Something's wrong, David muttered, watching the tactical display. These breach patterns, they're too precise. Too coordinated. He turned to Harper. Someone disabled sections of the perimeter defense grid before the ships arrived. An inside job. Harper's face paled as she connected the dots. The irregular shipments, Walsh's classified briefings. The Valori child trilled urgently from the examination table where Harper had placed her. She began making those same deliberate gestures with her functioning limbs, more complex sequences now. I wish we had a translator, David said, watching her movements intently. Harper activated her tablet. Maybe we don't need one. She pulled up xenolinguistics files, basic translation algorithms developed during earlier diplomatic exchanges. It won't be perfect, but it might give us something. The child continued her kinetic communication as Harper's tablet processed the patterns. Fragments of translation appeared on screen: frowny face humans, came, night, took, elders, metal, beneath, ground, my father, fought, died, I, hidden, watched, humans, not like, you, different. David and Harper exchanged troubled glances. She's saying humans attacked her settlement, Harper whispered. But not like us. Different somehow. Before they could press further, the lab's proximity alarm activated. Someone was attempting to override the security lock. I know you're in there. Walsh's voice came through the intercom, tightly controlled but edged with urgency. Open this door immediately. The colony is under attack. David approached the intercom but didn't activate the door release. What's happening up there, Commander? Unknown vessels have breached our perimeter. They're deploying ground forces. We need to evacuate all essential personnel. The pause. That includes the Valori child. Something in Walsh's tone set off warning bells in David's mind. Why the sudden concern for her welfare? A few hours ago, you were ready to ship her off-world as a treaty violation. The silence stretched for several seconds before Walsh responded. This isn't the time for insubordination, soldier. The situation has changed. Earth Command has issued new directives regarding first contact species preservation. Harper muttered under her breath, that's convenient timing. The Valori child had gone completely still on the examination table, her multifaceted eyes wide with terror as Walsh's voice continued through the speaker. She began a new sequence of gestures, frantically repeating the same pattern. Harper's translation algorithm processed the input: frowny face voice. Bad, took, my people, death. A chill ran down David's spine as pieces started falling into place. The Northern Valori disappearance. The classified communications. Walsh's inexplicable knowledge of supposedly abandoned settlements. Commander, David said carefully, I think we should wait for Captain Reyes to coordinate the evacuation. Where is she now? Another pause, longer this time. Captain Reyes is securing the command center. I've been authorized to evacuate priority assets. Walsh's voice hardened. Last chance, Chin. Open this door or I'll override it. David muted the intercom and turned to Harper. Something's very wrong here. The defense protocols are clear. Reyes would never delegate evacuation authority during an active attack. Harper was already accessing the lab's security systems. I'm pulling up external camera feeds. The monitor displayed the corridor outside the lab. Walsh stood there with 4 security personnel, but their uniforms were wrong. Subtle differences in the insignia, the cut of the fabric. And the weapons they carried weren't standard colony issue. Those aren't our people, David whispered. The security panel began flashing red as Walsh's override sequence neared completion. They had seconds at most before the doors opened. The Valerie child slid from the examination table, moving with surprising strength despite her injuries. She tugged at David's hand, pulling him toward an access panel in the rear wall of the lab. "What is she?" David began, but stopped as the child's intentions became clear. The access panel led to maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the sublevel. Escape routes not shown on standard colony schematics. Harper grabbed essential medical supplies and her tablet. How would she know about these? David remembered the translated fragments. Metal, beneath, ground. I think her people found something similar. Underground facilities. Maybe old structures, or... The security panel emitted a final warning tone as the override completed. The lab doors began to slide open. No time, David decided, helping the Valerie child open the access panel. We need to move now. As they slipped into the narrow maintenance tunnel, the lab erupted with shouted commands and the sound of equipment being overturned. Walsh's voice rose above the chaos, cold with fury. Find them. They can't have gone far. In the darkness of the tunnel, the Valerie child's skin began to emit a faint bioluminescence, just enough to light their way forward. She moved with purpose, as if following a map only she could see. David realized with growing certainty that whatever connected this child to the attack on her settlement, to the mysterious ships now assaulting the colony, to Walsh's betrayal, the answers lay deeper beneath the surface than anyone had thought to look, and those answers might determine the fate not just of one forsaken alien girl, but of two species teetering on the edge of a conflict neither might survive. The maintenance tunnels. Twisted through the colony's foundation like arteries, narrow and suffocating in their darkness. David led the way, with Harper close behind, carrying the Valerie child whose strength was beginning to falter. The dim bioluminescence of her skin cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls, giving everything an underwater quality. These tunnels must run beneath the entire settlement, Harper whispered, checking her tablet for any signal. But where are we going? Before David could respond, the Valerie child trilled softly and pointed ahead with unexpected urgency. David froze, listening. In the distance, the faint echo of boots on metal grating, search parties entering the maintenance system. They're tracking us somehow, David realized. He scanned their clothing, equipment, then his eyes fell on his comm unit. Our comms. Military grade with embedded trackers. He quickly removed his unit and Harper's, placing them in a small drainage pipe branching off the main tunnel. The Valerie child watched him with those intelligent, multifaceted eyes, then made a new series of gestures that Harper's tablet translated. Frowny face. Deeper, old place, safe. She wants us to go deeper, Harper said. Something about an old place? David nodded, making a quick decision. These colonial outposts are often built on existing infrastructure. If there's something beneath us, it's our best option. They progressed downward. Rough junctions and access hatches, the Valerie child directing their path with surprising confidence. The air grew colder, the tunnel surfaces changing from the sterile metal and concrete of colony construction to something older, strange alloys with patterns etched into their surfaces. This isn't ours, Harper breathed, running her fingers over wall markings that resembled neither human writing nor the flowing script of the Valerie. This predates both our species on this world. After nearly an hour of descent, they emerged into a vast chamber that stole their breath away. The ceiling arched 20 meters overhead, supported by columns inscribed with the same unknown script. The chamber's walls housed what could only be described as technology, dormant control panels and darkened displays of incredible complexity. And they weren't alone. A small group of Valerie adults turned toward them as they entered, 7 survivors, their skin bearing the same clan markings as the child. When they saw her, several rushed forward, trilling in what was unmistakably relief and joy. The child broke from Harper's arms and ran to them despite her injuries. They're survivors from her clan, David whispered. They've been hiding down here. An older Valerie male approached them cautiously. Unlike the others, his posture conveyed authority, an elder or leader. He made a series of deliberate gestures that Harper's tablet struggled to translate. Frowny face. You? Not, like, others? Oh, Hunt. We're not with them, David said, mimicking some of the gestures he'd seen the child use. We want to help. The Valori elder studied them, then gestured for them to follow. He led them deeper into the chamber toward what appeared to be an active console, the only technology showing signs of power. As they approached, a holographic display flickered to life, showing a three-dimensional map of the planet. Multiple locations were marked, including the human colony and what David presumed was the northern Valori settlement. But there were other markers, dozens of them scattered across the planet's surface, all linked to a central location deep beneath the planet's largest mountain range. Harper's scientific curiosity overcame her caution. This facility, it's part of a network. A planetary network. She turned to David, eyes wide. This isn't just some ancient ruin. It's operational. The elder Valori activated another display. This one showed images that made David's blood run cold. Human ships, not bearing official Earth insignia, landing near Valori settlements. Teams in unmarked combat gear rounding up Valori civilians. Excavation equipment being deployed at sites identical to the marked locations on the planetary map. Private military contractors, David said grimly. Not official Earth forces. That's why Walsh's men looked wrong. They're mercenaries. His mind raced. But working for who? And why? The answer came in the next series of images. Valori being forced to activate similar facilities across the planet. Many died in the process, their bodies discarded when they failed to interface with the technology. They're weaponizing them, Harper realized with horror. Turning them into activation keys for this technology. The Valori elder confirmed her theory with a series of complex gestures. The translation was fragmented but clear enough. Frowny face ancestors, left, great power, beneath, earth. Both, our people, guardians, secret hidden, long time, bad humans, learned, secret, want, weapons, great ships, beneath. That's why they attacked the Valori settlements, David said. They're looking for access to whatever this technology controls. Ancient weapons, ships, something powerful enough to justify a genocidal campaign. A distant rumble shook dust from the chamber ceiling. The attack on the colony was intensifying above them. But how does this connect to Walsh? Harper asked. Why would an Earth Command officer work with private mercenaries? Before anyone could respond, the Valori child approached the console. With surprising confidence, she placed her three-fingered hands on specific sections of the control panel. The displays changed, showing a human face that made David's stomach twist with shock and betrayal. Director Ellison, he breathed. Head of Extrasolar Resources Development. Images flashed across the display, classified documents, covert meetings, resource projections. The evidence of a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of Earth's colonial administration. They found traces of this technology in soil samples, Harper said, piecing it together as she read the documents. Realized its potential. But the treaty with the Valori prevented official exploitation. So they created a shadow operation, David finished. Using mercenaries disguised as official personnel. Walsh isn't just a collaborator, he's their field commander. The facility's lights suddenly pulsed, and a new alert appeared on the displays. The elder Valori trilled in alarm, gesturing frantically. They found other door, coming, soon, must, activate, protector. They found another entrance to the facility, David translated. We need to activate some kind of defense system. The Valori elder approached the child, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. Their exchange was solemn, the child's posture shifting from fear to resolution. When they finished, she turned to David and Harper. With deliberate movements, she placed one hand on her chest, then extended it toward David in a gesture unmistakable across species. Trust. Harper's tablet translated her next sequence. Frowny face eye. Show, secret, need, your help. Together, save, both people. The elder Valori approached a sealed doorway at the far end of the chamber. Ancient mechanisms groaned as it slowly opened, revealing a passage that descended even deeper beneath the planet's surface. Beyond the threshold, soft blue light pulsed in patterns reminiscent of a heartbeat. The Valori child took David's hand, looking up at him with eyes that held both fear and determination. They need our help, Harper said quietly. Whatever's down there, It needs both species to activate it. David understood then the reason the mercenaries had failed despite forcing the Valori to interface with the technology. The ancient system required cooperation, not coercion. Two guardians, two species, working together. The facility shuddered again, more violently this time. The sound of weapons fire echoed from distant corridors. "They're getting closer," David said, feeling the weight of the moment. "Whatever we're going to do, we need to do it now." The child tugged his hand, urging him toward the passage. David took a deep breath and stepped forward with her into the pulsing blue light, leaving Harper and the other Valori in the chamber to prepare defenses. As they descended the ancient stairway, the walls around them began to illuminate with symbols that shifted between Valori script and something that, impossibly, resembled early human languages. The deeper they went, the more the facility seemed to respond to their presence. Lights brightening, dormant systems humming to life. They reached another chamber, smaller but far more intricate than the one above. At its center stood two pedestals, sized perfectly for a human and a Valori. The child led him forward without hesitation. Above the pedestals, a holographic display activated, showing the planet, but not as it existed now. This was the world as it had been millennia ago, home to a civilization that had clearly known both humans and Valori. A civilization that had left this legacy for their descendants. The child positioned herself on the smaller pedestal and looked expectantly at David. The message was clear: they would either activate this ancient system together, or Walsh and his mercenaries would seize it, weaponizing technology meant to protect rather than destroy. As David stepped onto his pedestal, the chamber hummed with increasing energy. The child reached out her small three-fingered hand toward him across the space between them. There was no translation needed for this gesture. Some forms of communication transcended species. In that moment, with mercenaries closing in and the fate of two peoples hanging in the balance, David reached back. As their hands connected across the space between pedestals, energy surged through the chamber. Blue light flowed like liquid between David and the Valori child, their touch completing an ancient circuit designed millennia ago. The floor beneath them illuminated with intricate patterns that spiraled outward, racing along channels in the walls and ceiling. David felt a strange sensation, not painful, but overwhelming, as information flooded his consciousness. Images, knowledge, understanding that wasn't his own. In that moment, he experienced the world through alien perception. He saw humans as the Valori saw them, their strange five-fingered hands, their flat eyes, their rigid postures. He felt the terror of the attack on the northern settlement, the desperate flight through unfamiliar wilderness, the courage of a child determined to find help despite overwhelming odds, and he understood what this place truly was. "It's not a weapon," he whispered, voice filled with wonder. "It's a library. A record." The Valori child trilled softly, her mind similarly connected to his. Through their link, David understood her response as clearly as spoken words. Not just record. Protector. The chamber trembled as the activation sequence intensified. Dormant systems throughout the planetary network awakened, responding to their joined command. On the holographic display above them, the markers across the planet's surface pulsed in synchronization. Suddenly, the chamber door burst open. Walsh stood in the threshold, flanked by heavily armed mercenaries. His face contorted with rage when he saw what was happening. "Stop them," he shouted, raising his weapon. "We need the system intact." Dr. Harper and the elder Valori appeared behind Walsh's team, having been captured during their attempt to hold off the intruders. The elder's eyes widened when he saw the connection between David and the child, the fully activated pedestals. "Too late," David said, his voice resonating strangely as the system flowed through him. "You don't understand what this is, Walsh. None of you do." Walsh advanced, weapon trained on David's chest. Director Ellison spent 15 years tracking rumors of precursor technology in this sector. Whatever fairy tale these creatures told you, the reality is simple. This is the most advanced weapons platform ever discovered. And it belongs to Earth. "No," David replied. "It belongs to both worlds. That's the whole point." The system reached full activation. Throughout the chamber, dormant consoles hummed to life, data streams flowing across ancient displays. The holographic map expanded, showing not just the planet but the surrounding star system. Walsh faltered, momentarily taken aback by the scale of what was being revealed. Stand down, Chin. You've had an impressive run, but it's over. Step away from the pedestal. I can't, David said simply. We're integrated with the system now. Then we'll take the child, Walsh countered, gesturing to one of his men. Once we understand how this works, we won't need either of you. As the mercenary approached the Valori child, the connection between her and David intensified. Knowledge flowed faster, not just information about the facility, but about its purpose, its creators. They called themselves the Seeders, David said, the words coming not from his own knowledge but from the system itself. They found 2 promising species on neighboring worlds. They brought us here to grow together. The mercenary reached for the child, but recoiled as a barrier of energy manifested between them. Walsh fired his weapon in frustration, but the energy bolt dissipated harmlessly against the same protective field. The system is a guardian, David continued, designed to prevent exactly what you're trying to do. It activates fully only when our species cooperate. That's why your experiments failed. Why the Valori you captured couldn't give you access. Through their connection, David felt the child's fear giving way to determination. Together, they directed the system's interface, revealing the truth of what the ancient technology controlled. The holographic display shifted to show massive structures buried beneath the planet's surface, not weapons, but environmental systems. Terraforming engines, atmospheric regulators, weather control networks. The tools that had made this world habitable for both species. This planet was transformed, David explained, engineered specifically to support both human and Valori biology. A shared home, meant to foster cooperation between our peoples. Walsh's expression hardened. Control of a planet's environment is the ultimate strategic advantage, Chin. Director Ellison understands that. Earth Command understands that. Why do you think the treaty restricted both our species to designated territories? To prevent anyone from discovering the truth before we could secure it. You mean before you could weaponize it? Harper interjected. Threatened to shut down life support for the Valori settlements unless they submit. Frustration boiled over as Walsh realized control was slipping away. Enough. Final warning, Chin. Deactivate the system or we open fire on everyone in this chamber. The Valori child squeezed David's hand, sending a clear message through their connection. She had accessed something deeper in the system, something its creators had left as a last resort. A fail-safe. You still don't understand, David said, a calm certainty filling him. This system doesn't recognize your authority. It recognizes cooperation, partnership. With those words, the chamber sealed itself. Emergency bulkheads slammed down over the entrance, cutting off any escape. The holographic display shifted again, showing the colony above and the mercenary ships still attacking it. What have you done? Walsh demanded, panic edging into his voice. Not me, David replied. Us. He nodded toward the Valori child. The system is designed to identify threats to Eve. Our species. You just qualified. Throughout the facility, ancient machinery hummed with renewed purpose. On the display, pinpoints of light emerged from installations across the planet's surface, streaking toward the mercenary vessels. Not weapons fire, but swarms of automated defensive drones, technology far beyond current human or Valori capabilities. The mercenary ships didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, they were disabled, their weapons systems offline, their engines dead. In the colony above, similar drones neutralized Walsh's ground forces with precise, non-lethal efficiency. This was never about domination, David explained as Walsh and his men watched their plans crumble. The Seeders wanted us to evolve together, to eventually become caretakers of this world. They left us their knowledge, their technology, but only if we earned it through cooperation. The Valori elder trilled a sequence that needed no translation, his posture conveying vindication and relief. Harper moved to his side, checking the injuries he'd sustained during their capture. Walsh slumped against the wall, weapon lowered. Ellison will send more ships. This isn't over. Actually it is, David replied. Through the system, he and the Valori child were broadcasting everything, the truth about the planet, the conspiracy, Walsh's confession, to both human and Valori settlements. The Cedars built redundancies into their communication network. Everyone knows now. As the immediate danger passed, David felt the child gently withdrawing from their connection. The intensity of the system's integration faded, leaving him lightheaded but clear-minded. The ancient technology returned to a standby state, though now accessible to both species through proper protocols. In the days that followed, everything changed. Earth Command publicly disavowed Director Ellison and his co-conspirators. A new joint commission was established, with representatives from both human and Valori governments working to understand the Cedar technology and its implications for their shared future. David found himself appointed as human liaison to this commission, working alongside the elder Valori whose name he learned was Tariff. The survivors of the northern clan were given sanctuary within the colony while their settlement was rebuilt, breaking down barriers that had separated the species for too long. 1 week after the activation of the ancient system, David sat in the colony's newly established cultural center, watching human and Valori children cautiously interacting. Among them was the child who had changed everything. Her name, as closely as human vocal cords could approximate it, was Ilani. Her injuries were healing well under Harper's care. The trauma would take longer to fade, but already she showed remarkable resilience. As David watched, she carefully demonstrated a Valori game to a group of fascinated human children, her movements patient despite their clumsiness. "She's quite the teacher," Harper said, joining David at his observation point. "She's had practice," David replied with a smile. "Teaching stubborn humans to understand." Harper handed him a tablet. "You should see this. We've been translating more of the Cedar records. There's something unexpected." David scrolled through the data, his expression growing more astonished with each revelation. The Cedars hadn't merely found two compatible species and brought them together. The genetic evidence was clear. At some point in the distant past, humans and Valori had shared common ancestors. Divergent evolution had created seemingly different species, but at their core, they were family. "Does she know?" David asked, looking toward Ilani. "The Valori elders are still debating how to share this knowledge," Harper replied. "It changes everything about how both our peoples understand themselves." David watched as Ilani noticed his presence. She excused herself from the game and approached, her movements more confident each day. When she reached him, she made a gesture he'd come to recognize as her personal greeting for him, a motion that meant something between friend and protector. He returned the gesture, then added one the elders had taught him, the motion for future. Ilani's multifaceted eyes brightened. She repeated his gesture, then extended it into a longer sequence. Harper's tablet translated frowny face, two peoples, one home, many futures. Together, David nodded, feeling a sense of possibility that transcended the boundaries of language, of biology, of the past. Together, he agreed, outside the cultural center's windows, the alien sun set over New Terra colony. But it wasn't truly alien anymore, nor was it solely a human colony. It was becoming something new, a shared world where a forsaken child had found not just one human to give her a future, but a path for both their peoples to find a future together. 3 months after the activation of the ancient system, the New Terra colony had transformed. What had once been a strictly segregated military outpost was now an emerging center for interspecies cooperation. The stark utilitarian buildings were softened by Valori architectural elements, their curving, organic designs complementing the rigid human structures in unexpected harmony. David walked through the colony's expanded marketplace, where human vendors now traded alongside Valori craftspeople. Children from both species darted between stalls, their laughter a universal language that needed no translation. He spotted Ilani among them, her once damaged limb now fully healed, teaching a complex hand game to a mix of human and Valori youngsters. She noticed him watching and waved, excusing herself from the game. In the months since their shared connection through the ancient system, she had learned remarkable amounts of human language, just as David had become increasingly fluent in Valori gestures and trills. "David friend," she greeted him, using the human words she'd mastered while adding the Valori gesture for respect. "You leave today?" He nodded, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Just for a little while. The Earth delegation arrives tomorrow. Captain Reyes thinks it would help if they heard directly from someone who experienced the Cedar system firsthand." Ilani's multifaceted eyes flickered with understanding beyond her years. The brief mental connection they'd shared had left traces, not a continuous link, but moments of insight into each other's thought patterns. She understood the political complexities better than most adults of either species. "You will tell truth," she stated with certainty. "About ancestors. About Walshbad one." "I'll tell them everything," David promised. "And Dr. Harper will present all the genetic evidence proving our shared origins." The news of humanity's distant connection to the Valori had sent shockwaves through both societies. Some rejected it outright. The idea that the seemingly alien Valori were actually distant cousins to humanity challenged too many cherished beliefs. Others embraced the revelation as confirmation of what the more philosophically minded had always suspected: that life throughout the cosmos might share deeper connections than previously imagined. Tarov, the Valori elder who had become David's closest collaborator, approached them with the deliberate grace characteristic of his people. In the aftermath of the conflict, he had been appointed as the chief representative of the Valori in the new Joint Governance Council. "The transport is preparing for departure," Tarov said, his words now coming through a translation device developed from the Cedar technology. "The Council has approved your final presentation to Earth Command." David stood, nodding his thanks. "Any word from the other settlements?" 3 more have reported successful activation of local Cedar nodes," Tarov replied. "The environmental stabilization systems are coming online as predicted. The southern deserts have already recorded increased rainfall patterns." This was perhaps the most immediate benefit of their discovery. The Cedar technology was designed to maintain optimal conditions for both species across the planet. Regions previously thought uninhabitable were showing signs of rapid transformation, opening vast new territories for cooperative settlement. "And Walsh?" David asked quietly, ensuring Ilani was distracted by her friends. Tarov's expression darkened. "He remains in custody awaiting transfer to Earth. Director Ellison and 3 members of the Resource Board have been indicted for conspiracy and violations of the Colonial Ethics Act." The political fallout had extended far beyond New Terra. Evidence of similar attempts to exploit ancient technology on other frontier worlds had emerged, triggering the largest reorganization of Earth's colonial administration in decades. Dr. Harper joined them, carrying a data tablet displaying the latest findings from the Cedar archives. "You should include this in your presentation," she said, handing it to David. "The genetics team has confirmed it. The divergence point between our species occurred approximately 6 million years ago. The Cedars didn't just find us by chance. They were reuniting branches of the same evolutionary tree." David reviewed the data, still awed by its implications. They engineered this entire scenario, finding 2 offshoots of the same ancestral species that had evolved separately, bringing them to a shared world, leaving behind the tools to rebuild connection once we were ready. "A grand experiment in reunion," Tarov agreed. "Though I suspect they underestimated how stubborn both our species could be." A soft chime sounded throughout the colony, the 15-minute warning for the Earth transport departure. David knelt once more before Ilani, who had returned to their group. "I'll be back in 2 weeks," he promised. "Try not to teach the human children too many Valori secrets while I'm gone." She trilled with amusement, then surprised him with a human-style hug, her slender arms wrapping around his neck. "Bring back stories," she requested. "About Earthhome. About Star's journey." "I will," he promised. As David boarded the transport with Dr. Harper and their research materials, he took a final look at the colony below. Construction teams, mixed groups of humans and Valori, were expanding the settlement boundaries. Research groups studied the Cedar technology under the careful guidance of both species scientists. In the center of it all, a new structure was taking shape, the first joint educational facility, where children of both worlds would learn their shared history. Captain Reyes joined him at the viewport as the transport lifted off. "Quite a change from when you dragged that terrified child through my gate," she observed. "I thought you'd ended your career that night. Maybe started a war." "Instead we found a way forward," David replied. "Something better than either of us could have built alone." The transport broke through the cloud layer, the colony receding to a small cluster of lights on the planet's surface. But David knew that similar lights were appearing across the world as more Cedar facilities activated, as more settlements embraced the new reality of cooperation. He thought about the long journey ahead, not just the physical trip to Earth, but the greater journey their two species had begun together. There would be setbacks, resistance, moments when the old fears and suspicions resurfaced. But he had seen firsthand what was possible when barriers fell away. A forsaken child had found not just rescue but belonging. A lonely outpost had become the center of a new beginning. And two peoples who once saw each other as irredeemably alien had discovered their shared roots in the stars. As New Terra diminished to a blue-green sphere behind them, David opened his research notes and began preparing the words that might help humanity embrace its unexpected family among the stars.